that note, I think Barry will bring a dimension to the study of anti-Semitism that's very important. As you saw yesterday, and as many of you know, he's a long-time serious scholar on these matters. And he did an important study about 18 months ago, which he'll speak to you about in addition to other issues.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Right, now, as a Monty Python used to say, now for something completely different. Really, I'm an empiricist. My claim to fame really has been that I've done a lot of social surveys, international surveys, populations and opinion of Jews and other groups of people. And so I'm a great believer, I made a living out of being about evidence-based research, right? The idea is that if you want to make an argument, you've got to have some evidence. An easy way to do it with the media and people like that is that evidence with numbers is taken pretty seriously, because if you think about it, numbers is it's a bit like units of money, dollars, pounds. They are clear-cut, everybody understands them. So what I'm going to show you today is 3 contemporary studies of anti-Semitism. They're recent, they were in the last few years. These different data sets, which I'd like you to consider. We'll look at them and we'll see what we can get out of them. What it tells you, we'd have to see what it is. And the trick, of course, when you're producing any of these reports with any numbers, is actually, if you want to disseminate them, is you have to tell the story. All right? So what is the story about these numbers? How do we interpret them? And let me just say something about key requirements when you're doing statistical research or survey research. You need a number of things. That hopefully the people that you're reporting on, or whatever it is representative. That's the most important thing. Is it representative? And we have ways of sampling populations to decide how things are representative. It's also useful to have a large numbers of cases, right? Now, normally, the way that laws of probability go, which I won't bore you with, but basically you need 1,000 cases to make a case, right, in laws of probability. It's also very useful to have a lot of cases. I was involved in 1990, I'm being director the last 25 years of something called the American Religious Identification Survey. It's been a number of surveys funded by foundations and things every few years. And the 1990 one we did had 125,000 households. Right? Quite a big survey, you must admit. It was done on telephones. All the surveys I'm going to show you today, no longer do we do telephone surveys, because it's very difficult with mobiles. Because you used to get hold of landlines. If you actually use a landline, actually know where you're located, right? Because every landline has a code, right? A district code, or you can relate it to the zip code or the postcode. But these surveys you're going to see are done online, right? Online through internet. Now, so we want 1,000 cases where we can have more. One of the reasons we're doing 125,000 cases with a new thing in the United States is so we could say something about Rhode Island, right? Obviously we'd have 12,000 cases in Texas, or 25,000 cases and 20,000 cases in California, but we wanted to be able to say something about small areas of the United States, but we also wanted to say something about small groups of people, Jews, not just Protestants and Catholics, but break them down and say something about Mormons or Unitarians or people. Anyway, so obviously the larger number of people you get in, the better and the more persuasive it is. But the point about 1,000 cases, the laws of probability, is 2 standard deviations, right? And that means you get a high level of statistical significance. The other thing you need is reasonable response rates, right? If you talk to 1,000 people, but 100,000 people have refused you, those 1,000 people, even psychologically, must be slightly different to the 99,000 that didn't talk to you, or wouldn't talk to you, right? So, that's important. And we'll look at different types, because if you know the unknown populations versus known populations, right? The known population is, I want to get the opinions of everybody in this room, right? So, I don't know, there's 34 people, I have your names, and I make you all fill out a form, right? And 3 of you decide not to do it, but I at least know exactly who those 3 people are who've refused, right? And I can factor in the response rate and even statistically work out the chances of those 3 people there who refused being very different to the other 27 or whatever it is who votes. Okay, so some other criteria for good surveys. Clear definition of who the response unit is, the unit of response that we're dealing with. We have a universe, we have a unit of response, right? Could be an institution. We could write to every school and ask a school to answer. Somebody on representative part of the school. It can be individuals. Could be groups of people. So, what's a clear definition of what the unit of analysis is. We want to know something about the categories, the answers, right? Answers. Are they going to be normative answers or not? I mean, normative in terms of, do you like orange, blue, or green, right? There's no particular rank order there, right? But if I say good, better, best, then I've got exactly a little bit of a assumption of some quality of measurement, right? And we have to, the most important thing, of course, is the questions are understandable, right? That you think the people who answered the question understood what the question was. That's very important. If they don't understand the question, even if they want to help you, and they'll leave the question blank. I mean, most of you deal with students and all the rest of it, when they say, well, I couldn't understand the question, and they went on the next one. If you're in an American system, if you've got multiple choice, you can already tell which one don't work, because nobody filled in the multiple choice, or they all got the thing completely wrong, Right, now what I'm going to show, then I'm going to talk about anti-Semitism. When we talk about anti-Semitism, especially as we talked about here, we're talking about people, in a way, being victimized, right? They are subject to hostile intentions, speech, behavior. So, in many ways, what we're talking about is seeing people as victims, right? So, in many ways, we're going to talk about victimization reports on victimization. Now, when you do that, you get into, there's a whole area of expertise and literature on crime surveys, right? Crime surveys, national crime surveys. Now, I teach public policy. It's one of the things we have to talk about, and it's always very popular, is policing, right? Policing in the criminal justice system. Now, all of us know that the criminal justice system doesn't deal with all forms of crime, right? It has its own agenda, right? In which it's interested in some crimes and not others, right? It's interested in certain people creating those crimes because they're easy to get, right? If you do it during the day, you're more likely to get caught than you are at night, right? Give you an example. Rape, right? I say the word rape, everybody's ears pick up, as students do, right? If you look at the United States, there is a seasonality to rape in Chicago, right? Chicago and New Orleans are one of the two cities with the highest levels of rape in the United States. But in New Orleans, it happens basically month by month. It's pretty flat. Chicago, your chances of getting raped in January and February are very low. But if this time of year, July, August, pretty high. Right? Now, most of us are practical. Not many criminals or victims go out in -8 degrees centigrade, or Fahrenheit, is the case with both of them. And they're also wearing a lot of clothing. When they do go out, everybody's much more difficult. So you understand how these, we're talking about context, right? Context works in crime. They're also the way the criminal justice system works. What I said, what do they pick up? Right, if you look at murder rates, nearly all murders are reported, right? The clean-up rate, or clear-up rate, eventually from getting a person being murdered to somebody being put in jail or tried and convicted for that, vary greatly from one city to another. But also other forms of crime vary. And there's a kind of paradox to this. One of the areas, the more efficient the police force, the higher the crime rate. Right? The more the police force is trusted by the population, the higher the crime rate. Because people go to the police or call the police. Right? So you have a paradox. Which city in the United States has the highest rate of reported crime? Not violent crime, the rest of it. At least when I was teaching this in the 1980s, 90s at graduate school at City University of New York, it was Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon has a lot of crime. Most people don't feel that Portland, Oregon is the most dangerous place in the world. It was one of the few places, the last places in America, where people reported the theft of a bicycle so they could get insurance money. Everywhere else, the insurance companies wouldn't insure bikes and things like that. So you have a lot of petty crime being reported. Okay? Right, so this is the background to when we're talking about anti-Semitism. Right? Now, what we know from the British Crime Survey and everything else is that crime is underreported. Okay? People don't bother. Particularly type of crime, according to British surveys and done in Europe, show that interpersonal crime, violence is unreported. Somebody goes into a pub, gets drunk, and the rest of it, hits somebody else pushes them back, and the rest of it. That type of crime on a Friday or Saturday night in the streets of Oxford or London doesn't get in, right? When 15 people start beating each other over the head, somebody calls the cops, and there's a crisis. On the other hand, right, if somebody does exactly the same thing in a domestic situation, husband hits his wife or something like that, it's more likely, exactly the same thing, someone does it, it's more likely somebody to bring the police, right? So it depends who the perpetrator is and who the victim is, according to whether it's reported, whether it's pursued by the criminal justice system. Okay. That's the background. That's the general background. Now we're going to look at the Jewish problem. Okay, we have a survey here. This is a survey I did with a colleague of mine, a national demographic survey. Dealt with a lot of issues. What about your students? All right, let me say who they are first of all. There's 1,167 students, 1,157 students on 55 college campuses. The campuses, in other words, the students were drawn on the basis of campuses and it was stratified, so it was a national survey. How do you get a national survey? You say there are 4 regions of the United States and you decide to focus on public universities and private universities in each region. And it's not done on the basis of the proportion of Jewish students, it was done on the basis of a national picture of the United States. So the unit of analysis, it really is campuses, but we went from the campus down to the students. Right? You can understand what I'm talking about. There's no known, people don't carry an identity card or anything saying they're Jewish. People, students especially, this was based on actually distinctive Jewish names. We asked lots of people if they're distinctive we looked down distinctive Jewish names on publicly available data, right? So again, how do you cover populations? In certain states of the United States, student data is available. You have a list of the students can be gained online. In California, the University of California system, with 450,000 students, it's elite. They banned the access under privacy rules of the state of California. So our national study didn't cover California. One of the reasons we did region was we replaced California with other western states, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, right? I'm talking here about methodology, how you do methodology, right? You can't do, that's why we did by region and not by state, right? Some states, it was verboten to actually go and use this methodology. So these people were all self-reported students. We went up to people who were likely suspects of being Jewish, and we asked them if they were Jewish. Some of them said they're Catholic. One guy from Arizona with a very Jewish name said, yes, my ancestors in Germany in 1784 were Jewish, but since they've been in America, they haven't been Jewish. Doesn't mean to say he potentially could have been a victim, of course, of anti-Semitism. False positive, right? The anti-Semite doesn't know that a guy called Joseph Levy isn't Jewish. So he could have been a potential victim, but he's not part of the overall survey. So we've been asking this. Anyway, so the anti-Semitism questions are a couple of questions in a whole lot out of 50 or something. So we're dealing with a small part of it. Now, one of the good things about looking at anti-Semitism, alongside other types of data, is when you tell people, this is a survey about jobs or anything, they immediately focus on that particular thing and their antennae go up. And they may either exaggerate or give you false information or something like that. When you do it and you stick these key questions in amongst a whole lot of other questions, right, you're more likely to get a less considered response, right? So it may be more accurate. Well, that's a theory anyway. We have no way of testing any of those things, right? But the assumption is that you put some provocative questions in amongst a whole lot of mundane things, and they're less provocative, okay? All right, so let me just show you something of why we put in question why we put anti-Semitism questions into survey of young people in the United States. Well, this is a survey done by the Pew Research Center, well known for all its surveys, and it was a survey of US Jews done actually by a non-Jewish organization. And this is the national survey. You see it was done in 2013. It's well known. It had a nationally representative sample of people who said they were Jewish in the United States. It was about 2,500 people. Look at the question. It's the experience of US Jews. They were asked, in the past year, have you been called offensive names? Yeah, called offensive names. Well, it assumes that even here, that the offensive name was Jewish. They didn't say fatty or something like that, right? Okay? But the assumption here is in the Jewish survey, it's being discriminated as a Jew. Now, what is interesting about this data, all right? Well, first of all, you see there's a kind of, there's a line with the age, right? There's an age, there seems to be an age issue here. That young people are much more likely to have been called an offensive name than older people. But it's actually very well staggered. Can you see? It really does go up. It doesn't, there's no breaks there. The trajectory is pretty steady, right? The line, right? Between the X and the Y, okay? So, how do we interpret that? Well, one of the things is, are young people different to old people, right? Has there been a breakdown in civility in American society, right? That's one thing. Okay, that young people are just more nastier than old people, right? Less mannered, right? They use bad, language. And another thing is, another potential theory or argument Could be that older people don't meet non-Jews, and therefore only meet Jews, and therefore no one's going to say anything bad about them because of being Jewish, right? They're more exposed, the younger people, to a wider society, right? Of course, the problem there is that people in 30s and 40s are also, they're working, right? You know, if you're an accountant, I don't know, or you know, you work at any kind of job, you're a nurse or something like that, you're going to meet a wide variety of people just as much as a 19-year-old, right? So it's still, you know, you've still got that fact that the victimization rate is much higher amongst the under 30s. Now, could be that another thing that I'm going to talk about quite a bit is the tolerance level. Older people just, you know, don't regard things as as an insult where younger people do. In other words, you know, their pain threshold of young people is higher, right? It's lower. Right? The pain threshold of young people is lower, right? They're more aware of what people say to them. The old people say, you know, silly old script. You know, I don't take any notice of what that person says, right? Or they've just been inured to it. They've had so much so far in their lives in the last 50 years or whatever it is for the older folks that they don't take any notice, right? The other one, of course, is that the theory that most people who've looked at this data come up with is that it's due to the penetration of social media. That in fact, this is the same line as you get with social media, who uses social media, right? That is the only thing which is really age-zoned in the United States, right? The younger people are obsessed with using their phones, and the old people don't do it. And a lot of, as we'll see in some of the surveys, when I show you other stuff, that social media is, the internet, if you want to call it, is where you're going to get a lot of this offensive names. Now, very important to say that all of this stuff here, all of these people reporting, right, none of this would go into the criminal justice system, right? None of this is going to be reported to the police or anything like that, okay? I don't think. Unless it was systematic harassment, right? Never going to get there. And you don't know if it's personal or not. Did they just see something that was said, oh, you know, all Jews don't care? You know, for these people, 18 to 29, it was, you know, in the street, right? It was actually called offensive. This was actually on the street. And therefore, it was in person. A lot of the younger people, it seemed to be, if you did some other kind of analysis, tended to be males who were reporting most as the young people, and Orthodox males. So in other words, the people who were known by, you know, wearing fancy dress or traditional costumes, who are the most likely to have names called other than social media. Okay, well, we all know that one of the biggest issues in the United States is cyber harassment. All right, very big issue. If you're a politician or a well-known person, you get all these ridiculous. Your email is full of nasty stuff from people, and it's because that is the nature of it is, and one of it is, social media is very problematic. It's anonymous, and it appears to be, according one of my yesterday, I think in the New York Times, Ari, what's his name? Anyway, from New York.
Golden.
Golden. Yeah.
Golden.
No, Ari Goldman is a guy who's New York law professor. Yesterday wrote something about cyber harassment, especially against gay community and women. But, you know, and the whole question of how you deal with it in law. But the point is, it's metastasizing to a lot of people, in the opinion of many people. Okay. All right, so that's the beginning. Why would you concentrate particularly on anti-Semitism at that? And if you are going to look at the United States, you would go towards young people because they're the victims, right? That's the first idea. Okay, so now we have. Now listen, look at this question. right? This is what you might call a question designed by a committee, right? Although people have different views as to what constitutes anti-Semitism, would you say that you have witnessed, right, see that, witnessed or personally been subjected to anti-Semitism in any of the following contexts since the beginning of the academic year, right? So 1157 self-identifying Jews were asked this question. Now, they come from, the only good thing about it is they all come from 55 campuses, so it can't be the same one perpetrator, right? Okay, so, out of the 1157, 54% said yes, right? They'd witnessed or experienced, okay? So that's a majority, right? So that's a headline for the story, I guess. Now, let's have a look at the context, okay? So, the interesting thing here is the largest context is from an individual student, right? It's interpersonal, okay? Which is where it's either going to be somebody they met in the street, or they were in the cafeteria, or it's social media, right? From clubs and societies, 10%, again, a little bit interpersonal, right? Very difficult to decide whether that's, it's not probably the club and society, but it's in the context of the club and society. The other one seems to be in some individual contact, which is not specific to a particular activity. Understand? Other contexts, 10% of the students. In a lecture or class, which means, that was one way of asking, was it the faculty? Was it the teachers? Right? Without directly saying that. And 6%, right, of all of the 6% of the 1157, so it's about 70 students reckoned that their professor was an anti-Semite. Right? Understand the situation? All right, in a student union, which is some kind of political meeting of some kind, right? Some kind of meeting, a political union, 4%, right? And the university administration, not the faculty, but the people who run the university, the management, right? 3% of the students. Now, you could say, these are the 3% of the, you know, it's very low. So the official cognitive system of American universities, both public and private, there doesn't seem to be a lot of institutional anti-Semitism, right? The institutions, as far as the students are concerned, are not picking on Jews, right? If there's anybody picking on Jews, it's individuals, right? No one, or you could say there are universities, some of the things, there are universities out there that pick on Jews, but not the 55, and you've got 55 campuses, and there are, you know, several thousand in the United States, and maybe the Jews, you know, avoid the places where they know the administrative system is. And of course, it's against the law. That's where you do have legislation, Title 9, Title this, that, and civil rights legislation, which actually protects people against the bottom title, the last item. Okay. Everybody with me still? Good. All right. Now, remember that who were the students? 631 students, right? The 631 students who are subject to anti-Semitism are here, right? These are the people who reported. Who reported it? Okay? Now I'm giving you very simple bivariate statistics, right? So, what does it mean? We're talking about the 631 versus the 1157, okay? 1157, the 631. 59% of female students reported they'd been victims of anti-Semitism. 51% of males, okay? So women were more likely to report than men. Okay. Now, does it matter when you arrived on the campus if you're going to be subject to anti-Semitism? Are they picking on newcomers and leaving seniors, or is it because you've been around a long time? If you look at all of those things, right, and you've got in effect, American colleges are four-year colleges, and then we've also thrown in a few postgraduates, right? So we're covering about 6 years at the college, right? And remember, but of course this is not cumulative, remember? It's not how many, what's happened in the last 5 years, is what happened, remember the original question, what's happened this academic year, right? So they're reporting on the current academic year, not their life experience. Now, makes absolutely no difference, right? There's no age thing here, right? You're not picking on older, more senior students have more of a problem than juniors, or they all decide they're going to haze the freshmen, right? Nothing at all. That's statistically, there's no statistical significance. Now, does it make a difference? Remember I said, does it make a difference what you study at the college, right? Your subject. Well, we already saw that the number of people who are receiving who thought the administration was anti-Semitic, or that their professor was anti-Semitic, wasn't very high. So we wouldn't actually expect it to make a lot of difference, which classes you went to. Okay? So you see, nothing, right? The other point to make out, right, is when you get data which is this consistent, it does suggest that the data is good, right? We're only dealing with 1,000 people here, and we've got flat data, right? There's no kind of real big variations, which suggests we've got peculiar populations in one place or another. Okay? So actually, if you know statistics, this actually means that the validity of the data is pretty good, because we are getting this flatness, right? Okay, the type of campus. Okay, so I said we looked at public schools and private colleges in the United States by region, right? So the variation here is from 70% to 44%. Now, if you know anything about statistics, I said you need a large sample to get valid data, right? When we break up the data into, the first one is two categories, right? Boys and girls. This one, if you look at it, is 8 categories. Right? That means if we've got 1,000 people, we've got about 120 people in each category. If you've got that, you're going to get much more variation. The interesting thing here is that it's not a large variation. It's from 44 to 77%, and the mean is in the 50s. Right? So there's ascendancy, and it's peculiar kind of data. You go to the south in a public college, you've got much higher. On the other hand, private colleges in the south are below average. Right? Public schools in the Midwest, and look, private schools in the west are 44%, but public schools in the west, 60%. What it really shows is there's not a great deal of regional variation. That doesn't seem, it's not, whatever problem Jewish students have in the United States is a national problem. It's not a regional problem. You can't turn around and say the south or the west is where they're picking on the Jews. All right, now let's look at the Jews, the characteristics of the Jews themselves. Right? We asked them their worldview. Do you consider yourself spiritual, religious, or secular? That's an interesting way of looking at the world. In other words, do people of a certain psychological world view feel themselves more vulnerable or less vulnerable? The most interesting thing again there is the flatness of it, right? Doesn't matter if you're secular or religious. Right, synagogue denomination. This is, of course, a peculiarity, right? Orthodox Jews, and the most visibly, usually, at least the Orthodox Jewish men, would be the ones who would be most visibly noted, right? They would be the ones who would stand out when you're looking at people. And it's lowest for Orthodox and highest for conservative. A peculiarity there, which is different to the situation on the street. Somehow, either Orthodox students are again, have a very hide of rhinoceros and don't take any notice of it, or they're less likely to mix. I mean, there's a number of theories here, but it is counterintuitive, right? All right, something is thrown up here. On the other hand, we said, what kind of Jewish campus organization? if you are involved on the campus, are you more likely to report discrimination or victimization? Well, the answer is yes, right? It's about 10 points higher than average. If you're in a Jewish fraternity or sorority, if you go to Chabad or you go to Hillel, doesn't make any difference, right? On the other hand, it is peculiar. Orthodox less, people who go to Chabad, slightly above average. Obviously, there's some kind of, should be an interrelationship there, but it doesn't show up. But, you know, you can see campus organization, you think about it, being a member of Jewish organization means you're going to witness all that. But I guess if there's a demonstration at the Hillel or something is, graffiti is put on a Jewish building, then that will count for it. All right, your involvement in politics, right? This is the Zionist one, I guess, anti-Zionism, interpretation of anti-Semitism. If you are, you know, APAC people reporting higher victimization than J Street, although J Street, being a Jewish liberal doesn't make you immune to all forms of victimization, right? There is a political skew there, but again, it may be that APAC people are less tolerant of things, or they are particularly, they could be assertive in the other way and run into trouble a great deal. The last one is quite fascinating. It's because it's kind of, it relates to the campus organization in some way. People were asked, are you always open about being Jewish on campus, right? I mean, do you hide it, or do you tell everybody that you're Jewish? And it's not, I've just taken out the two polarities. There was always, sometimes, boom, 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 and then never, right? The people who are always Jewish and very out are scoring just over average, and the people who never tell anybody they're Jewish are also victims, somehow, right? They haven't told anybody they're Jewish, but they are receiving. So somebody knows about them or picking them out, probably on the same way we did on the basis of this surname. Okay, so there's something to think about there. So, can we turn around? Now, one of the keys in social science is always, you have to make a comparison, right? Is the bottle over there half full or half empty, right? Should it be full or should it be empty? These are the questions. So, in social science, the way you prove anything, if you want to be a scientist, or at least show a trend, is you do it in comparison. You take Jews, have you been a victim of prejudice, and you'd say Jews and, I don't know, Portuguese people, or something like that, and see if it's different. So you can do comparison across groups, you can do comparison across societies. Is it different between high school and university, or, is it different across societies? Now, one of the reasons we use that peculiar question was because it had been used before in the UK, with a Jewish student. And I wanted to ask exactly the same question in the States as was asked in Britain, so you'd have this international comparison. Now, again, the most fascinating thing here is Americans cite slightly more than the UK Jewish students. It's roughly the same number. It's about, actually, I think the British one is about 1,500 students. But you can see it's near enough the same, right? It seems to be, that's statistically insignificant, right? Yes, no. Well, just over half in both cases say they've witnessed or been personally subjected to anti-Semitism. Is the glass half full, half empty? Those of you who are pessimists say, well, it's not as bad as I thought. Those of you who are optimists think, well, there's a lot of problems around. And then, then we have to ask the question, is it the same? Are these the same type of societies, or are they different societies? And also, are there different levels of perception here? Is it that British students are just, so used to anti-Semitism, or have a completely different view of anti-Semitism, that they're reporting slightly lower than American students? Right? American students just more, self-aware as Jews, and the others less so. But, okay, so let's have a look at a comparison on these things. Now, we do see some differences across these. So, as I say, replication or comparison is important, keeping that wording the same. And also, of course, so we're looking across space here. There's not much difference in time, right? 2014 versus 2011, so I don't think that's a problem. Historical events. Now again, in both cases, we're looking only at the victims, right? Those people who said they didn't have a problem are out of this now. So what do we see? Right. American students are much more likely to say it's another individual student, right? Interpersonal relations are much more of an issue for American students than they are for British students, right? Not much difference in clubs and societies, right? Lectures and classes, it seems that there's no statistical difference there at all against faculty, right? 2 points is really nothing. Student union. The student unions in Britain are much more political, have many more debates and discussions on political issues. And as you can see, there the British Jews think that they had more problems there. The administrative system, however, even less in the UK than in America. Right? They don't feel that that's the problem. Other contexts are much higher in Britain, and that was speakers coming from outside and visitors and things like that. So you see some kind of a difference in the patterns, although they report the same number, right? Some slight differences. It seems to be a little bit more political and outsiders versus people they know in the United States. Could be that, which is the biggest problem? Is it the fact that it's political, or is it the fact that it's individual? The point here is, of course, that there is some difference there, which is what we expect. But we don't really know, again, two things is lacking here. Right? We know nothing about how serious any of these things are, because we didn't have enough questions. And the other thing is, we have no data at all on the perpetrators. Right? We don't know who it is who's causing these people angst, right? Who's victimizing. Nevertheless, this is the beginning of a process. Okay? All right. So we dealt with students. Now, I'm going to take questions now because I'm going to give you a completely different data set. Anybody got any questions on what you've seen so far?
Just a quickie, maybe.
Sure.
The inclination seems to be, I mean, I can see you're going after the group that you think is most likely to be your target audience. But does that preclude, doesn't that seem, when we do that sort of thing, doesn't that kind of preclude the possibility that, for instance, if you do Holocaust instructors across the country and see the correlation between teaching a certain subject and being the victim of certain kinds of accusations, wouldn't that be a more legitimate look at the nature of how anti-Semitism permeates society rather than a self-selected group that is already kind of sensitized to be looking for the issue?
Well, I think you made an assumption that they're sensitized to be looking for the issue. As I said, it was part of a survey that wasn't about anti-Semitism. And if they were sensitized, then 100% of them would have said they were victims, right? Only 50% said reported they were victims. So, all right. So, I mean, at least, even if we've ratcheted it up, but we've avoided complete bias, right? Obviously, I mean, but the whole point of any of it, I come back to criminal statistics, is people's perceptions of their tolerance level of anything, right? Is an issue. There is a whole literature and a whole environment about campus climate in the United States. This relates actually to campus climate. Do people feel comfortable on campus? You've got a whole lot of people on the American campus spend all their time, student affairs or whatever they are, who spend a lot of time trying to make sure that everybody loves each other and there's no incidents. So I don't think it's a problem. Yeah, Jill?
I'm curious about something else. In Britain, a lot of the studies done by CST, for example,
Yeah.
Community Security Trust, says they correlate events that were going on and the heightened anti-Semitic acts during, let's say, the Gaza war.
Yeah.
And to what extent, and one could say maybe during a heightened BDS movement, or more activity on the BDS front, or how does that correlate with any of the data that you're presenting in terms of outside events affecting the various
Right.
students?
Remember, we're talking about a particular time and
Right.
place,
Right.
all right? So it doesn't mean to they say, you know, Gaza war or anything else. We asked them about campus at a particular time when there wasn't any war going on, right? So this is, it's time specific, right? It's that beginning of that academic year. So, you know, that falls away. The British one where it says student unions, you could interpret the same way. There's an event, right?
Right.
That's why outside, you know, other contexts or whatever it is, could be seen as part of that. So the British one did suggest more external influences than the American data, right? Because if it's interpersonal and it's Jimmy over there, you just, you know, thrown a cup of water over me or something like that, that, you know, might not be the Gaza war, you know? Yeah.
Great. I'm thanks first of all for this presentation. I would like to do two things. I guess first is respond and build a little bit upon the interjection that David was making, and then also ask you if you might just go back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
But first, I think try to build on that. Aren't we always going to deal a bit when attempting to probe this kind of information? Aren't we going to deal with the problem of shared definitions?
Yes.
Right? Because I mean, in levels of as if sensitivity, right? As I think, as you put it, are not agreed upon, because one man's sensitivity is another person's lack of awareness, right? So, for instance, you look at issues of race, ethnicity, discrimination, anti-Semitism, any ism, right, directed at individuals from hostile groups or individuals' experiences of marginalization. We're going to account for those. I mean, almost on a continuum. You deal with those who are saying, "Oh, what's all the fuss about?" Or it's not really there. I mean, he just said, kike, or she just said nigger. I mean, we all have free speech, right? And then, or then you have someone else who says, "Oh, the Holocaust didn't happen. Or slavery wasn't that bad. They ate well in the White House, right?" So it's about level of sensitivity and how we control for that. And as we luxuriate the data and luxuriate our interpretations of it, we have to look into all these kind of hermeneutics and such, right? So can I ask you to go back to the last slide? Oh, very great. Yeah, and also I'd be interested to hear kind of a macro conversation about the society and the extent to which these identifications can be writ large or extrapolated. Because here, as I'm looking at it, as someone who did research on Britain and the U.S. on matters of race, I'm really interested to see how connections are made between this data and general notions of the particular society. For instance, the American kind of focus on the individual rights as opposed to and of course this is very grossly exaggerated, but and also the British notions of the collective, the corporate, and how that behaves in the societies. The American students, those who've come to be privileged to study in places such as the UK, have the experience of being the gregarious American, "Hi, how are you?" and then going to Hall and saying, why aren't the British kids talking to me? Everyone's just looking down,
Yeah,
and the British kids are like, why are there all this noise in and I just want to respect everyone's space.
If nobody talks to you, they're not likely to make an anti-Semitic remark.
Right, it's like, we don't talk to anybody. This is the way we're polite to one another, at least in this
Yeah,
class,
I think you hit on something here,
right?
Carlton. With the American students, a lot of it, we came up with more women than men. The whole thing of Jewish women is an issue in the United States. Jewish women feel as though they've been picked up. The JAP, the Jewish American Princess. A lot of them said there were connotations of that, of being privileged and, dressing too well and the rest of it. The other point was, which is interesting, is there may be a difference about how people interpret jokes, right? That Americans' jokes in bad taste, that British people just laugh off and say, because there's a much more, the satirical, comedic tradition is much more prominent in British society than it is in the United States. That's part of it. So people making jokes at the end of Jews, there was a Jew, an Italian and a Frenchman, they went into a bar, that kind of stuff. And the Americans found that offensive, whereas the British people just said, it could have been an Irishman. So you've got, I think there's a something about that. But I want to go on, because I'm now going to look at, deal with your question a little bit more by looking at these European leaders. Okay? So these are the people who, in theory, have to deal with this question. This is a third survey that we did. I did this for the JDC, the Joint. So let me just tell you about it quickly. Let's see if this is the profile. Here we are. This is the profile. These were Jewish community leaders and opinion formers, about 300 they're from 29 countries, everywhere from Turkey to Finland or somewhere. These were sort of Jewish leaders, right? The people who said, the top 5 or whatever it was, 10 people in each country. And obviously, because of that, a couple of things. Immediately, you have to ask the question, who are these people? There's 29 countries, right? We've got here, Slovakia has got as nearly as much influence as France, right? Because we take one unit at a time. The unit of analysis is the country, and then we ask the top 10 people in each country, right? So, you've got an over-representation here of small communities, okay? That's the first thing, right? Just like the European Union has got lots of little countries and a few big ones, right? One less now. So we got, so that's important. Now, what it was happening, all the questionnaire, again, it's a long questionnaire, but we did this out of my shop in Trinity. We did it on the internet, online, but it was done in 5 languages. We produced 5 language versions of the questionnaire, so that people didn't have a problem. So, all right. So it was English, French, German, Spanish, and Hungarian. There were 5 languages, which still means there's an issue, right? If you're Polish, you have to make a choice, right? To do it in a second language. So if you're a real, careful methodologist, right, you've already got, it's a caveat, right? Did all the people understand it, right? 90% of the people probably answered it in their home language, but 10% or so didn't, okay? So that, you could undermine, if you want to critique something, you always find it. My job has always been to think about the critiques before they happen, so when they call up, they've already got the answer. Well, yeah, of course, some people didn't answer it, the Danish didn't answer in their native language, but, we know what the Danes said last time, and most of them know English, and actually 94% of university graduates, right? And if you go to university in Denmark, you have to know German or English, right? So you got the answer, even before they thought it out, right? Okay, so these are the leaders. They're quite interesting in these communities. This was given to me, it was a list given to me by the Joint. So I didn't choose these people. And it's their interpretation of who's a Jewish leader, right? It's a community leader. Doesn't mean they're the most famous Jewish actor in Romania or something like that. It's whoever's running the community, okay? But 51% were lay leaders, unpaid people. 31% were professionals, ran in community centers, a few rabbis. 18% were what they called opinion formers, either often journalists and top lawyers and things like that. The split here between countries, between Western and Eastern Europe, right? Now, the fact is, of the 29 countries, it doesn't include Russia and Yellow Russia and all that rest. Those places. It goes up to it's the European Union plus Turkey and the rest of it. Eastern Europe, what we did the definition of Eastern Europe is former Warsaw Bloc countries minus the German Democratic Republic, which is now part of the Federal Republic, right? East Germany is not. East Germany went into West Germany, into West Europe. The rest of them, East Europe is everybody up to the Russian border, I guess. Now, the leadership, 66% of these people who answered the question are male, 33% female. I didn't put up their ages. The average, the median age was in the 50s. As I say, a very well-educated group of people. These are their Jewish denominations. As you see, it was beautiful for actually analysis. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, right? And then we also asked them this kind of worldview thing. Is your overall outlook secular or religious? And you can see that they were split half and half roughly there, which was good. So if you wanted to do any in-depth analysis, you got a good sample here, right? Mostly by chance, not because again, the list was given to us. All right, well, what do these folks say? So, this is done last summer, and they're asked their perception of change in the expressions of anti-Semitism in the past. Actually, it was since the previous one in 2011. It's over 4 years. Last 4 years. What's the change? What's increased and what's decreased? Okay, and these are the kind of types of expressions of anti-Semitism that a community leader would be worried about if there's an attack on a cemetery or, As you can see, overall they thought it had all gone up, right? A few things have gone down, but mostly gone up. So, by the way, they asked all these things. You didn't choose. You said, has it increased on the internet? Yes, no, right? So these are not cumulative, or there's no 100% here. It's how many people said it increased a lot and decreased a lot. Other people, remember what's left out of here is the no change, right? Everybody. So you've got the columns, right, are individual, right? But the horizontal is 100%. So 75% said the internet had increased a lot, 1% less, 76, 24% said no change, okay? Or didn't answer. All right. Well, you can see the issue. People attacking dead Jews increased a little bit, and it decreased a little bit, but it's not a major problem, right? Okay? In the cemeteries. Not a major thing. Vandalism of Jewish buildings increased a little bit, but some people say it's decreased a lot, so it's a +7, right? And the other one's a +6. In political life, a bit more serious, it's gone up 11, right, overall. In the media, right, as far as the Jewish community leaders went, they have more problems with the media now than they had in the past. Most of them said so. But you can see the biggest problem as far as they're concerned is the internet, social media, and that's where it is. And everywhere in the world, everybody's got a problem with the internet. And you can see there's practically a consensus there. Overall, 74% of people said it increased a lot on the internet. So we're back to this cyber harassment and things like that. They're probably getting a lot of nasty messages themselves, right, every day. And it only takes one guy to send, of course, 1,000 messages out exactly the same, saying, I'm going to, you're a dirty dog, or I'm going to get you, or whatever it is. But it, gives you an overall view of Europe. Overall, the Jewish leaders of Europe think, on the whole, anti-Semitism has increased in the last 4 years, right? But you can see it's in specific places. Okay.
Professor, can I ask?
Yeah, sure.
What kind of people said that it decreased? Because there was a small number who said it decreased.
Yeah, well,
who were they and why?
They were leaders, right?
Yeah, I know.
They said in Bulgaria there's been...
Which ones and why?
I don't know why, but they were just reporting, say, vandalism of a cemetery. It happened in 2009, and since 2011, there's been no incidents of anybody defacing tombstones in Bulgarian cemeteries. That's what they're reporting. Right?
One of the interesting features, though, of your statistics was also that the difference between internet versus actual violence, because the difference between the two is one of which is called in the virtual world. So it's interesting to see that there's a discussion taking place there, but it didn't translate into a comparable number of events that would seem to manifest.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean to say, I mean, one is a low-cost thing. We're coming back to crime. You know, if you're going to knock down a cemetery, maybe, and you get caught, you may go to jail. Sending, you know, the other one is you can send out police. It's ease of access and the rest of it. Of course, I mean, all of it. That's it. You know, all crime is, you know, crimes. It's a crime of opportunity versus one of being, you know.
And I don't mean to be a traveling footnote to you, David, but I just want to comment on your on this as well. It seems like again it's back to definitions, because how do we define peace? How do we define violence? Because and something else that I really have dealt a lot with, I'm really passionate about, is the whole area of free speech, and that's something I taught a lot. Mm-hmm. And there are arguments that can be made about speech as violence.
Yeah. Well, that's why you've got some sort of practical facts, right? Was a cemetery hit? Is a real, that's a binary, yes, no, right? The others, as you say, have got lots of shades of grey.
And definitions.
Yes, yeah, all right. So that's why we ask.
For the purposes, we're going to define violence as this.
Yeah, so you're both right. I mean, he's right that in terms of actual, physical activity, it's not that, but it has all of them report increase, right?
But I was right first.
Yeah, you might even be left and correct. Okay. Then we got the Allies Against Anti-Semitism, which I think is interesting. How many people? This is the leaders' view of who is on their side in the battle on anti-Semitism, right? Now, overall, 2/3 felt more pessimistic about anti-Semitism. They, is it likely to increase? So we asked in 2011, 2008, and you can see the proportion of people saying it's likely to increase had grown in 2015. Half of them in 2011, 2/3 of them in 2015. There's a consensus across different types of European Jews, according to country, with 2/3 say they're pessimistic. It's going to increase, all right? So, mostly, a lot of them are the same people, so you can say that's real. As to which elements in society they regarded as the strongest allies in this struggle, now again I've taken the most extreme category, always, most of the time. A majority of respondents put their current national government. They seem to think that the governments were their allies. More than Jewish organisations abroad. In fact, they were more confident about their national governments than they were in 2011. And that's because the European Union has done lots of things with monitoring centres and has shown themselves slightly more amenable. It's gone up a little bit. So there's a lot of... Now, what other things besides national governments all the time? So we asked centrist political parties. Were seen as reliable as Christian leadership. Now look at the numbers down. 29% think Christian religious leadership is supportive always and most of the time. National human and civil rights groups have a very low opinion of those. International human rights organisation, the same. Intellectuals and academics, not great allies. The mainstream media, 10%. So what they're really saying is national governments will have to maintain law and order dealing with physical activities you can rely on. In other words, the criminal justice system, they don't, the police will probably investigate the crime. But all these other things are really in the realm of, opinion, right? And free speech. And all of them, they don't feel are supportive, okay? Or dependable allies. But again, what's interesting is a lot of people in different societies, and there seems to be an overall consensus that they don't have firm and dependable political, I don't know what you want to call it, allies. Okay, now we ask on the threats. Where are the threats coming from? Regarding threatening groups, who are the threats? Right-wing nationalist parties, 40% almost all the time, which is a decrease since 2008. Left-wing parties, Marxist parties, 21%. Right? The Muslim leadership, actually, religious leadership, has gone down. They think they're less of a problem than they were in the past. Only 23%, no, 12%. And that may be due to a regional balance. We've got more Eastern Europe bloc countries this time where there's fewer Muslims. But it's still interesting in terms of where they see the dangers. From the point of view of Jewish history, what is interesting is the Westerners identified more sources of threat than Easterners, both from the left and the right. So nationalist parties in the West, more than the East. Marxist parties in the West, more than the East. Non-mainstream media, more in the West than the East. Muslims, more in the West, less in the East. And it's fascinating if you think about, and started off with the Holocaust this week, that took place in Eastern Europe, that the Eastern European Jews, the remnants there, are less anxious and seem less likely to be victims than in perceptions of the communities than the Western communities, right? The Belgians and the French and the people. All right. Easterners less likely to dismiss the threat from conservative and Christian parties. In other words, what the Easterners were worried about was conservative and Christian parties more than nationalists. That's a European difference between Christian Democrats and extreme right parties. Another significant variation concerned old age. Older people saw older Jews were more worried about leftist parties and Muslims than the younger generation. Okay, so those were significant. We do tests of significance. Take it again. I don't stand behind this data. This is people's opinions. If you don't like it, go and call them and complain. Right, future expectations. Right, you've got optimists or pessimists. The overall assessment of the findings regarding security and safety of Jews, that European leaders do not regard the current situation as an immediate crisis, but they think the situation is slowly deteriorating for Jews now. If they expected the changes in the frequency of the problems stemming from anti-Semitism, they were asked over the next 5 or 10 years, pessimistic. 23% would increase significantly, 44% increase somewhat, only 27% remain constant, only 3% think anti-Semitism is going to decrease. Now, you could have turned around and said, well, we presented this problem, and, if you'd asked 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 40 years ago, you would have got the same answer, right? Because coming back to Dave's point, you've primed these people, okay? And that's why they're Jewish leaders, etc. But again, pessimism. 2/3 in the West, 1/2 in the East. But again, it's tolerance level. And when I show you some other data, you'll see there's an issue about tolerance level. People who are used to anti-Semitism and against people who've suddenly encountered it for the first time and are traumatized. All right, so we got Israel and anti-Semitism. Okay, anti-Zionism. Statistical analysis showed age and gender failed to predict differences in reactions towards Israel. Right? Across these European leaders, at least, didn't make any difference. Largest and most significant differences were regional. Europeans, Eastern Europeans, voicing greater intensity of support and loyalty for Israel. Western Europeans, more critical of Israel. That's the overall political opinions. Westerners were more likely, we asked the question, are you ever ashamed of the actions of the Israeli government? And you can see, 54% of the Western leaders said yes, somewhat strongly, 44% of the East. And of course that may be related to the impact of the media. Remember, the people in the West said they had more problems with the media. By contrast, the amount of hostility in the media and Israel related to anti-Semitism were rated lower by Easterners. The media in my country regularly portrays Israel in a bad light. 85% of the Western leaders said that's true, only 50% in the East. Right? It's either that Eastern Europeans don't pick on Israel as much. The gap is particularly wide on the highest rating, strongly agree. Right? For the statement, events in Israel sometimes lead to an increase in anti-Semitism in my country. Right? Events in Israel. This is what Gil raised before. Right? The Gaza or whatever it is. 62% of leaders in the West say, yeah, it leads to an increase of anti-Semitism. Only 27% in the East. In other words, Eastern European public or media not particularly interested in what goes on in the Middle East as much as people in the West. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, this gets to the heart of a lot of issues. The vocabulary and the structure here. There's a big difference between writing Israel
Yeah.
and writing Israeli government or government
Yes,
policy.
it makes a big difference. Yeah.
So
I mean,
I
if
don't
you look at
see
the
that-
actual report,
I don't-
no, there's many more questions. I've just taken this out.
So can you just comment on things that are not here that would have been in the report that temper
Well, actually,
the way this?
I can tell you that this report is online, and you can really go online
I know,
and look
but
at
you're
it.
here and we're listening.
Israeli government. Well, to Easterners, all right, let me just make a point here. Westerners, a little bit more, shall we say, differentiate Israel from the Israeli government more than Eastern Europeans do. Eastern Europeans didn't make much difference between the Israeli government and Israel. Mainly because they're actually more supportive, more see themselves more Zionist, and maybe because they come out of more nationalist environments where it's your job to support the national team, right? So I would say that. The mediating thing is the events in Israel, which is, Israel or the government, So my point would be that Western Europeans are more pessimistic, they're more worried, they feel more pressured, right? And definitely the Israeli government the Israel government doesn't help. One of the reasons why it's gone in a certain direction in Western Europe is the Israel government seems to be more, should we say, the kind of religious nationalist coalition, right, in Israel. It's more than it was in the past, right? When we started in 2011, it may have been a more moderate government, if you want to put it that. Yeah, I mean, that's it. But again, I've only got these, 300 and something people. Doesn't tell us everything, but it's important because these are the leaders, right? But people who are sophisticated do make a distinction. The point is, do the people who are causing the Jews problem make the distinction? Right? That's the issue. Yes, sir.
A couple questions or points. I agree that I actually wrote the question down. I had a problem with, are you ashamed of the actions of the Israeli government?
Yeah.
That's isn't that a biased question of sorts?
Well, we have some which are very. Do you think the Israeli? There's a whole lot of questions which were the opposite, right? Which were primed to turn around and say, that I'll support the government of Israel, right or wrong, So there was a, thing. I've just taken these out, like you have to tell a story. So again, the essence of this is go back and look at the original and then complain.
Well,
Okay?
as long as I have your ear on that one,
Yeah.
I actually pulled up the full report and I was looking at it. And,
Yeah.
I'm an outcome-based
Yeah.
researcher as well.
Yeah.
And the data show very interesting results, but where are you going with it? In other words, I found it interesting that there was a wide disparity between AIPAC and J Street people.
Oh, you mean on
On the other one,
On the other one.
I had my hand raised before.
Yeah,
and then,
sure.
But is that correlated, or is there a relationship with other variables? In other words, just to throw something simple out, you asked whether they're Orthodox, Reform, Conservative.
Yeah.
Does that correlate at all with J Street and AIPAC? And would that make a difference, and how do you report this data?
It's peculiar. Actually, people have got characteristics. The AIPAC students tended to be male and slightly more Orthodox, right? The J Streets tended to be slightly more female and Reform, right? So there was a bias there. On the other hand, the males were reporting less anti-Semitism than the other. So it's very, very difficult to get it out. There seem to be cross-cutting characteristics, right? So if you look at the whole profile, a lot of it sort of falls away. if you did, I mean, we did, you know, statistical analysis of likelihood ratios, right? And that showed that APAC was twice, if you're a member of APAC, you were twice as likely to come across
You say
anti-Semitism.
things that may evoke a response, where
Yeah.
J Street doesn't.
No, but they were getting it from their roommates, right?
From the
Or, you
APAC.
know, or being told that they were wearing too much flashy jewelry and that's typically Jewish. You know, that kind of stuff, you know? So, you know, so a lot of that's interpersonal that the women were reporting. So, yeah, the other APAC was twice as likely. When you put a likelihood ratio there, they're twice as likely as a person who was non-political, right? And it is because they're in maybe a few of them in raucous meetings where, you know, it starts off polite and then people start shouting names. Yeah, it's, you know, the more hostile people you meet, the more likely you are to be a victim, right? I think if you don't go at your house, you're unlikely to be mugged in the street. Okay, that's, you know, you can be burgled, but you won't be mugged. Okay. All right, we're going to break now, and I'll show you this one. I'm going to now show you some much more sophisticated data, more than bivariate.